Welcome to the Vox Lore. Our channel produces immersive fantasy audiobooks for entertainment and storytelling enjoyment. All content, including narration, sound design, and storytelling elements, is created with passion for fantasy fans. Previously, we followed Sam Watkins through the fading hopes of the Kentucky campaign, a march filled with hunger, hardship, and hard lessons. Now, the war grows darker. The battles are bloodier. And Watkins, no longer a green soldier, finds himself at the heart of one of the Civil War's most savage confrontations. Welcome to Part 3 of Company Aytch by Sam Watkins. Chapter 9. Battle of Chickamauga. Sunday morning of that September day, the sun rose over the eastern hills clear and beautiful. The day itself seemed to have a Sabbath day look about it. The battlefield was in a rough and broken country, with trees and undergrowth, that ever since the creation had never been disturbed by the acts of civilized man. It looked wild, weird, uncivilized. Our corps, Pokes, being in the engagement the day before, were held in reserve. Reader, were you ever held in reserve of an attacking army? To see couriers dashing backward and forward, to hear the orders given to the brigades, regiments, and companies, to see them forward in line of battle, the battle flags waving, to hear their charge, and then to hear the shock of battle, the shot and shell all the while sizzing, and zipping, and thudding, and screaming, and roaring, and bursting, and passing right over your heads, to see the litter corps bringing back the wounded continually, and hear them tell how their command was being cut to pieces, and that every man in a certain regiment was killed, and to see a cowardly colonel, as we saw on this occasion, he belonged to Longstreet's corps, come dashing back looking the very picture of terror and fear, exclaiming, "Oh, men, men, for God's sake go forward and help my men. They are being cut all to pieces. We can't hold our position. Oh, for God's sake, please go and help my command." To hear some of our boys ask, "What regiment is that? What regiment is that?" He replies, "Such and such regiment." And then to hear some fellow ask, "Why ain't you with them, then, you cowardly puppy? Take off that coat and those chicken guts, coo, sheep, bah, bah, black sheep, flicker, flicker, ain't you ashamed of yourself? Flicker, flicker, I've got a notion to take my gun and kill him," etc. Every word of this is true, it actually happened. But all that could demoralize, and I may say intimidate a soldier, was being enacted, and he not allowed to participate. How we were moved from one position to another, but always under fire, our nerves strung to their utmost tension, listening to the roar of battle in our immediate front, to hear it rage and then get dimmer until it seems to die out entirely, then all at once it breaks out again, and you think now in a very few minutes you will be ordered into action, and then all at once we go double-quicking to another portion of the field, the battle raging back from the position we had left. General Leonidas Polk rides up and happening to stop in our front, some of the boys halloo out, say, "General, what command is that which is engaged now?" The general kindly answers, "That is Longstreet's corps. He is driving them this way, and we will drive them that way, and crush them between the upper and nether millstone." Turning to General Cheatham, he said, "General, move your division and attack at once." Everything is at once set in motion, and General Cheatham, To give the boys a good send-off, says, "Forward, boys, and give MHL." General Polk also says a good word, and that word was, "Do as General Cheatham says, boys." You know he was a preacher and couldn't curse. After marching in solid line, seesawing, right obliquing, left obliquing, guide center and close up, commence firing, fire at will, charge and take their breastworks, our pent-up nervousness and demoralization of all day is suddenly gone. We raise one long, loud, cheering shout and charge right upon their breastworks. They are pouring their deadly missiles into our advancing ranks from under their headlogs. We do not stop to look around to see who is killed and wounded, but press right up their breastworks, and plant our battle flag upon it. They waver and break and run in every direction, when General John C. Breckinridge's division, which had been supporting us, march up and pass us in full pursuit of the routed and flying Federal Army. After the battle, we remained upon the battlefield of Chickamauga all night. Everything had fallen into our hands. We had captured a great many prisoners and small arms, and many pieces of artillery and wagons and provisions. The Confederate and Federal dead, wounded, and dying were everywhere scattered over the battlefield. Men were lying where they fell, shot in every conceivable part of the body. Some with their entrails torn out and still hanging to them and piled up on the ground beside them, and they still alive. Some with their underjaw torn off, and hanging by a fragment of skin to their cheeks, with their tongues lolling from their mouth, and they trying to talk. Some with both eyes shot out, with one eye hanging down on their cheek. In fact, you might walk over the battlefield and find men shot from the crown of the head to the tip end of the toe. And then to see all those dead, wounded and dying horses, their heads and tails drooping, and they seeming to be so intelligent as if they comprehended everything. I felt like shedding a tear for those innocent dumb brutes. Reader, a battlefield, after the battle, is a sad and sorrowful sight to look at. The glory of war is but the glory of battle, the shouts, and cheers, and victory. A soldier's life is not a pleasant one. It is always, at best, one of privations and hardships. The emotions of patriotism and pleasure hardly counterbalance the toil and suffering that he has to undergo in order to enjoy his patriotism and pleasure. Dying on the field of battle and glory is about the easiest duty a soldier has to undergo. It is the living, marching, fighting, shooting soldier that has the hardships of war to carry. Where a brave soldier is killed, he is at rest. The living soldier knows not at what moment he, too, may be called on to lay down his life on the altar of his country. The dead are heroes, the living are but men compelled to do the drudgery and suffer the privations incident to the thing called glorious war. A night among the dead. We rested on our arms where the battle ceased. All around us everywhere were the dead and wounded, lying scattered over the ground, and in many places piled in heaps. Many a sad and heartrending scene did I witness upon this battlefield of Chickamauga. Our men died the death of heroes. I sometimes think that surely our brave men have not died in vain. It is true, our cause is lost, but a people who love those brave and noble heroes should ever cherish their memory as men who died for them. I shed a tear over their memory. They gave their all to their country. Abler pens than mine must write their epitaphs, and tell of their glories and heroism. I am but a poor writer, at best, and only try to tell of the events that I saw. One scene I now remember, that I can imperfectly relate. While a detail of us were passing over the field of death and blood, with a dim lantern, looking for our wounded soldiers to carry to the hospital, we came across a group of ladies, looking among the killed and wounded for their relatives, when I heard one of the ladies say, "There they come with their lanterns." I approached the ladies and asked them for whom they were looking. They told me the name, but I have forgotten it. We passed on, and coming to a pile of our slain, we had turned over several of our dead, when one of the ladies screamed out, "Oh, there he is! Poor fellow! Dead, dead, dead!" She ran to the pile of slain and raised the dead man's head and placed it on her lap and began kissing him and saying, "Oh, oh, they have killed my darling, my darling, my darling. Oh, mother, mother, what must I do? My poor, poor darling. Oh, they have killed him, they have killed him." I could witness the scene no longer. I turned and walked away, and William A. Hughes was crying, and remarked, "Oh, law me, this war is a terrible thing." We left them and began again hunting for our wounded. All through that long September night we continued to carry off our wounded, and when the morning sun arose over the eastern hills, the order came to march to Missionary Ridge. Chapter 10. Missionary Ridge. After retreating from Chickamauga, the Yankees attempted to reform their broken lines on Missionary Ridge. We advanced to attack them, but they soon fell back to Chattanooga. We knew they were in an impregnable position. We had built those breastworks and forts, and knew whereof we spoke. We stopped on Missionary Ridge, and gnashed our teeth at Chattanooga. I do not know what our generals thought, I do not know what the authorities at Richmond thought, but I can tell you what the privates thought. But here we were on Missionary Ridge and Lookout Mountain, looking right down into Chattanooga. We had but to watch and wait. We would starve them out. The Federal Army had accomplished their purpose. They wanted Chattanooga. They laughed at our triumph, and mocked at our victory. They got Chattanooga. Now, where are you, Johnny Reb? What are you going to do about it? You've got the dry grins, aren't you? We've got the key. When the proper time comes we'll unlock your doors and go in. You are going to starve us out, eh? We are not very hungry at present, and we don't want any more pie. When we starve out we'll call on you for rations, but at present we are not starving. Buy a jug full, but if you want any whiskey or tobacco, send over and we'll give you some. We've got all we wanted, and assure you we are satisfied. The above remarks are the supposed colloquy that took place between the two armies. Bragg, in trying to starve the Yankees out, was starved out himself. Ask any old rebel as to our bill of fare at Missionary Ridge. In all the history of the war, I cannot remember of more privations and hardships than we went through at Missionary Ridge. And when in the very acme of our privations and hunger, when the army was most dissatisfied and unhappy, we were ordered into line of battle to be reviewed by Honorable Jefferson Davis. When he passed by us, with his great retinue of staff officers and playouts at full gallop, cheers greeted them, with the words, "Send us something to eat, Massa Jeff. Give us something to eat, Massa Jeff. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Sergeant Tucker and General Wilder. At this place the Yankee outpost was on one side of the Tennessee River, and ours on the other. I was on the detail one Sunday commanded by Sergeant John T. Tucker. When we were approaching we heard the old guard and the Yankee picket talking back and forth across the river. The new guard immediately resumed the conversation. We had to halloo at the top of our voices, the river being about 300 yards wide at this point. But there was a little island about the middle of the river. A Yankee hallooed out, "Oh, Johnny, Johnny, meet me halfway in the river on the island." "All right," said Sergeant Tucker, who immediately undressed all but his hat, in which he carried the Chattanooga Rebel and some other Southern newspapers, and swam across to the island. When he got there the Yankee was there, but the Yankee had waited. I do not know what he and John talked about, but they got very friendly, and John invited him to come clear across to our side, which invitation he accepted. I noticed at the time that while John swam, the Yankee waited, remarking that he couldn't swim. The river was but little over waist deep. Well, they came across and we swapped a few lies, canteens and tobacco, and then the Yankee went back, wading all the way across the stream. That man was General Wilder, commanding the Federal cavalry, and at the Battle of Missionary Ridge he threw his whole division of cavalry across the Tennessee River at that point, thus flanking Bragg's army, and opening the battle. He was examining the ford, and the swapping business was but a mere byplay. He played it sharp, and Bragg had to get further. Moccasin Point. Manny's brigade fortified on top of Lookout Mountain. From this position we could see 5 states. The Yankees had built a fort across the river, on Moccasin Point, and were throwing shells at us continually. I have never seen such accurate shooting in my life. It was upon the principle of shooting a squirrel out of a tree, and they had become so perfect in their aim, that I believe they could have killed a squirrel a mile off. We could have killed a great many artillery men if we had been allowed to shoot, but no private soldier was ever allowed to shoot a gun on his own hook. If he shot at all, it must by the order of an officer, for if just one cartridge was shot away or lost, the private was charged 25 cents for it, and had to do extra duty. And I don't think our artillery was ever allowed to fire a single shot under any circumstances. Our rations were cooked up by a special detail 10 miles in the rear, and were sent to us every 3 days, and then those 3 days' rations were generally eaten up at one meal, and the private soldier had to starve the other 2 days and a half. Never in all my whole life do I remember of ever experiencing so much oppression and humiliation. The soldiers were starved and almost naked, and covered all over with lice and campage and filth and dirt. The men looked sick, hollow-eyed, and heartbroken, living principally upon parched corn, which had been picked out of the mud and dirt under the feet of officers' horses. We thought of nothing but starvation. The Battle of Missionary Ridge was opened from Moccasin Point, while we were on Lookout Mountain, but I knew nothing of the movements or maneuvers of either army, and only tell what part one took in the battle. Battle of Missionary Ridge. One morning Theodore Sloan, Hog Johnson, and I were standing picket at the little stream that runs along at the foot of Lookout Mountain. In fact, I would be pleased to name our captain, Fulcher, and Lieutenant Lansdowne, of the guard on this occasion, because we acted as picket for the whole 3 days' engagement without being relieved, and haven't been relieved yet. But that battle has gone into history. We heard a Yankee call, "Oh, Johnny, Johnny Reb." I started out to meet him as formerly, when he hallooed out, "Go back, Johnny, go back, we are ordered to fire on you." "What is the matter? Is your army going to advance on us?" "I don't know, we are ordered to fire." I jumped back into the picket post, and a mini ball ruined the only hat I had. Another and another followed in quick succession, and the dirt flew up in our faces off our little breastworks. Before night the picket line was engaged from one end to the other. If you had only heard it, dear reader. It went like 10,000 wood choppers, and an occasional boom of a cannon would remind you of a tree falling. We could hear colonels giving commands to their regiments, and could see very plainly the commotion and hubbub, but what was up, we were unable to tell. The picket line kept moving to our right. The second night found us near the tunnel, and right where 2 railroads cross each other, or rather one runs over the other high enough for the cars to pass under. We could see all over Chattanooga, and it looked like myriads of blue coats swarming. Day's and Manigault's brigades got into a night attack at the foot of Lookout Mountain. I could see the whole of it. It looked like lightning bugs on a dark night. But about midnight everything quieted down. Theodore Sloan, Hog Johnson and myself occupied an old log cabin as vidette. We had not slept any for 2 nights, and were very drowsy, I assure you, but we knew there was something up, and we had to keep awake. The next morning, nearly day, I think I had dropped off into a pleasant doze, and was dreaming of more pretty things than you ever saw in your life, when Johnson touched me and whispered, "Look, look, there are 3 Yankees, must I shoot?" I whispered back yes. A bang, a wall went a shriek. He had got one, sure. Everything got quiet again, and we heard nothing more for an hour. Johnson touched me again and whispered, "Yonder they come again, look, look." I could not see them, was too sleepy for that. Sloan could not see them either. Johnson pulled down, and another unearthly squall rent the night air. The streaks of day had begun to glimmer over Missionary Ridge, and I could see in the dim twilight the Yankee guard not 50 yards off. Said I, "Boys, let's fire into them and run." We took deliberate aim and fired. At that they raised, I thought, a mighty sickly sort of yell and charged the house. We ran out, but waited on the outside. We took a second position where the railroads cross each other, but they began shelling us from the river, when we got on the opposite side of the railroad and they ceased. I know nothing about the battle, how Grant, with one wing, went up the river, and Hooker's corps went down Will's Valley, etc. I heard fighting and commanding and musketry all day long, but I was still on picket. Balls were passing over our heads, both coming and going. I could not tell whether I was standing picket for Yankees or rebels. I knew that the Yankee line was between me and the rebel line, for I could see the battle right over the tunnel. We had been placed on picket at the foot of Lookout Mountain, but we were 5 miles from that place now. If I had tried to run and I couldn't, I had got separated from Sloan and Johnson somehow, in fact, was waiting either for an advance of the Yankees, or to be called in by the captain of the picket. I could see the blue coats fairly lining Missionary Ridge in my head. The Yankees were swarming everywhere. They were passing me all day with their dead and wounded, going back to Chattanooga. No one seemed to notice me. They were passing to and fro, cannon, artillery, and everything. I was willing to be taken prisoner, but no one seemed disposed to do it. I was afraid to look at them, and I was afraid to hide, for fear someone's attention would be attracted toward me. I wished I could make myself invisible. I think I was invisible. I felt that way anyhow. I felt like the boy who wanted to go to the wedding, but had no shoes. Casabianca never had such feelings as I had that livelong day. Say, Captain, say, if yet my task be done? And yet the sweeping waves rolled on, and answered neither yea nor nay. About 2 or 3 o'clock, a column of Yankees advancing to the attack swept right over where I was standing. I was trying to stand aside to get out of their way, but the more I tried to get out of their way, the more in their way I got. I was carried forward, I knew not whither. We soon arrived at the foot of the ridge, at our old breastworks. I recognized Robert Brank's old cornstalk house, and Alf Horsley's fort, an old log house called Fort Horsley. I was in front of the enemy's line, and was afraid to run up the ridge, and afraid to surrender. They were ordered to charge up the hill. There was no firing from the rebel lines in our immediate front. They kept climbing and pulling and scratching until I was in touching distance of the old rebel breastworks, right on the very apex of Missionary Ridge. I made one jump, and I heard Captain Turner, who had the very 4 Napoleon guns we had captured at Perryville, halloo out, "Number 4, solid," and then a roar. The next order was limber to the rear. The Yankees were cutting and slashing, and the cannoneers were running in every direction. I saw Day's brigade throw down their guns and break like quarter horses. Bragg was trying to rally them. I heard him say, "Here is your commander," and the soldiers hallooed back, "Here is your mule." The whole army was routed. I ran on down the ridge, and there was our regiment, the 1st Tennessee, with their guns stacked, and drawing rations as if nothing was going on. Says I, "Colonel Field, what's the matter?" "The whole army is routed and running. Hadn't you better be getting away from here? The Yankees are not 100 yards from here. Turner's battery has surrendered. Day's brigade has thrown down their arms, and look yonder, that is the Stars and Stripes." He remarked very coolly, "You seem to be demoralized. We've whipped them here. We've captured 2,000 prisoners and 5 stands of colors." Just at this time General Bragg and staff rode up. Bragg had joined the church at Shelbyville, but he had backslid at Missionary Ridge. He was cursing like a sailor. Says he, "What's this? Ah, ha, have you stacked your arms for a surrender?" "No, sir," says Field. "Take arms, shoulder arms, by the right flank, file right, march, just as cool and deliberate as if on dress parade." Bragg looked scared. He had put spurs to his horse, and was running like a scared dog before Colonel Field had a chance to answer him. Every word of this is a fact. We at once became the rear guard of the whole army. Author's note: I remember of General Manny meeting Gary. I do not know who Gary was, but Manny and Gary seemed to be very glad to see each other. Every time I think of that retreat, I think of Gary. I felt sorry for General Bragg. The army was routed, and Bragg looked so scared. Poor fellow, he looked so hacked and whipped and mortified and chagrined at defeat, and all along the line, when Bragg would pass, the soldiers would raise the yell, "Here's your mule, bully for Bragg, he's HL on retreat." Bragg was a good disciplinarian, and if he had cultivated the love and respect of his troops by feeding and clothing them better than they were, the result would have been different. More depends on a good general than the lives of many privates. The private loses his life, the general his country. Goodbye, Tom Webb. As soon as the order was given to march, we saw poor Tom Webb lying on the battlefield, shot through the head, his blood and brains smearing his face and clothes, and he's still alive. He was as brave and noble a man as our Heavenly Father, in His infinite wisdom, ever made. Everybody loved him. He was a universal favorite of the company and regiment, was brave and generous, and ever anxious to take some other man's place when there was any skirmishing or fighting to be done. We did not wish to leave the poor fellow in that condition, and A.S. Horsley, John T. Tucker, Tennessee Thompson and myself got a litter and carried him on our shoulders through that livelong night back to Chickamauga Station. The next morning Dr. J. E. Dixon, of Deschler's brigade, passed by and told us that it would be useless for us to carry him any further, and that it was utterly impossible for him ever to recover. The Yankees were then advancing and firing upon us. What could we do? We could not carry him any further, and we could not bury him, for he was still alive. To leave him where he was we thought best. We took hold of his hand, bent over him and pressed our lips to his, all four of us. We kissed him goodbye and left him to the tender mercies of the advancing foe, in whose hands he would be in a few moments. No doubt they laughed and jeered at the dying rebel. It mattered not what they did, for poor Tom Webb's spirit, before the sun went down, was with God and the holy angels. He had given his all to his country. Oh, how we missed him! It seemed that the very spirit and life of Company Aytch had died with the death of good, noble and brave Tom Webb. I thank God that I am no infidel, and I feel and believe that I will again see Tom Webb. Just as sure and certain, reader, as you are now reading these lines, I will meet him up yonder, I know I will. The Rear Guard. When we had marched about a mile back in the rear of the battlefield, we were ordered to halt so that all stragglers might pass us, as we were detailed as the rear guard. While resting on the roadside we saw Day's brigade pass us. They were gunless, cartridge boxless, knapsackless, canteenless, and all other military accoutermentsless, and swordless, and officerless, and they all seemed to have the possum grins, like Bragg looked, and as they passed our regiment, you never heard such fun made of a parcel of soldiers in your life. Every fellow was yelling at the top of his voice, "Yellowhammer, Alabama, flicker, 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 Yellowhammer, Alabama, flicker, flicker, flicker." I felt sorry for the Yellowhammer Alabamians, they looked so hacked, and answered back never a word. When they had passed, 2 pieces of artillery passed us. They were the only 2 pieces not captured at Missionary Ridge, and they were ordered to immediately precede us in bringing up the rear. The whole rear guard was placed under the command of the noble, generous, handsome and brave General Gist, of South Carolina. I love General Gist, and when I mention his name tears gather in my eyes. I think he was the handsomest man I ever knew. Our army was a long time crossing the railroad bridge across Chickamauga River. Manny's brigade, of Cheatham's division, and General L. E. Polk's brigade, of Cleburne's division, formed a sort of line of battle, and had to wait until the stragglers had all passed. I remember looking at them, and as they passed I could read the character of every soldier. Some were mad, others cowed, and many were laughing. Some were cursing Bragg, some the Yankees, and some were rejoicing at the defeat. I cannot describe it. It was the first defeat our army had ever suffered, but the prevailing sentiment was anathemas and denunciations hurled against Jeff Davis for ordering Longstreet's corps to Knoxville, and sending off Generals Wheeler's and Forrest's cavalry, while every private soldier in the whole army knew that the enemy was concentrating at Chattanooga. Chickamauga Station. When we arrived at Chickamauga Station, our brigade and General Lucius E. Polk's brigade, of Cleburne's division, were left to set fire to the town and to burn up and destroy all those immense piles of army stores and provisions which had been accumulated there to starve the Yankees out of Chattanooga. Great piles of corn in sacks, and bacon, and crackers, and molasses, and sugar, and coffee, and rice, and potatoes, and onions, and peas, and flour by the hundreds of barrels, all now to be given to the flames, while for months the rebel soldiers had been stinted and starved for the want of these same provisions. It was enough to make the bravest and most patriotic soul that ever fired a gun in defense of any cause on earth think of rebelling against the authorities as they then were. Every private soldier knew these stores were there, and for the want of them we lost our cause. Reader, I ask you who you think was to blame. Most of our army had already passed through hungry and disheartened, and here were all these stores that had to be destroyed. Before setting fire to the town, every soldier in Manny's and Polk's brigades loaded himself down with rations. It was a laughable-looking rear guard of a routed and retreating army. Every one of us had cut open the end of a corn sack, emptied out the corn, and filled it with hard tack, and, besides, every one of us had a side of bacon hung to our bayonets on our guns. Our canteens, and clothes, and faces, and hair were all gummed up with molasses. Such is the picture of our rear guard. Now, reader, if you were ever on the rear guard of a routed and retreating army, you know how tedious it is. You don't move more than 10 feet at furthest before you have to halt, and then 10 feet again a few minutes afterwards, and so on all day long. You haven't time to sit down a moment before you are ordered to move on again. And the Yankees dash up every now and then, and fire a volley into your rear. Now that is the way we were marched that livelong day, until nearly dark, and then the Yankees began to crowd us. We can see their line forming, and know we have to fight. The Battle of Cat Creek. About dark a small body of cavalry dashed in ahead of us and captured and carried off one piece of artillery and Colonel John F. House, General Manny's assistant adjutant general. We will have to form line of battle and drive them back. Well, we quickly form line of battle, and the Yankees are seen to emerge from the woods about 200 yards from us. We promptly shell off those sides of bacon and sacks of hardtack that we had worried and tugged with all day long. Bang, bang, sizz, sizz. We are ordered to load and fire promptly and to hold our position. Yonder they come, a whole division. Our regiment is the only regiment in the action. They are crowding us. Our poor little handful of men are being killed and wounded by scores. There is General George Manny badly wounded and being carried to the rear, and there is Moon, of Fulcher's battalion, killed dead in his tracks. We can't much longer hold our position. A mini ball passes through my Bible in my side pocket. All at once we are ordered to open ranks. Here comes one piece of artillery from a Mississippi battery, bouncing 10 feet high, over brush and logs and bending down little trees and saplings. Under whip and spur, the horses are champing the bits, and are muddied from head to foot. Now, quick, quick, look, the Yankees have discovered the battery and are preparing to charge it. Unlimber, horses and caisson to the rear. Number 1 shrapnel, load, fire, boom, boom, load, obliate, boom, boom. I saw Sam C. fall badly wounded and carried to the rear. I stopped firing to look at Sergeant Doyle how he handled his gun. At every discharge it would bounce, and turn its muzzle completely to the rear, when those old artillery soldiers would return it to its place, and it seemed they fired a shot almost every 10 seconds. Fire, men. Our muskets roll and rattle, making music like the kettle and bass drum combined. They are checked, we see them fall back to the woods, and night throws her mantle over the scene. We fell back now, and had to strip and wade Chickamauga River. It was up to our armpits, and was as cold as charity. We had to carry our clothes across on the points of our bayonets. Fires had been kindled every few yards on the other side, and we soon got warmed up again. Ringgold Gap. I had got as far as Ringgold Gap, when I had unconsciously fallen asleep by a fire, it being the 4th night that I had not slept a wink. Before I got to this fire, however, a gentleman whom I never saw in my life, because it was totally dark at the time, handed me a letter from the old folks at home, and a good suit of clothes. He belonged to Colonel Breckinridge's cavalry, and if he ever sees these lines, I wish to say to him, God bless you, old boy. I had lost every blanket and vestige of clothing, except those I had on, at Missionary Ridge. I laid down by the fire and went to sleep, but how long I had slept I knew not, when I felt a rough hand grab me and give me a shake, and the fellow said, Are you going to sleep here, and let the Yankees cut your throat? I opened my eyes, and asked, Who are you? He politely and pleasantly, yet profanely, told me that he was General Walker. The poor fellow was killed the 22nd of July, at Atlanta, and that I had better get further. He passed on and waked others. Just then, General Cleburne and staff rode by me, and I heard one of his staff remark, General, here is a ditch, or gully, that will make a natural breastwork. All I heard General Cleburne say was, I saw General Lucius E. Polk's brigade form on the crest of the hill. I went a little further and laid down again and went to sleep. How long I had lain there, and what was passing over me, I know nothing about, but when I awoke, here's what I saw. I saw a long line of blue coats marching down the railroad track. The first thought I had was, well, I'm gone up now, sure, but on second sight, I discovered that they were prisoners. Cleburne had had the doggedest fight of the war. The ground was piled with dead Yankees, they were piled in heaps. The scene looked unlike any battlefield I ever saw. From the foot to the top of the hill was covered with their slain, all lying on their faces. It had the appearance of the roof of a house shingled with dead Yankees. They were flushed with victory and success, and had determined to push forward and capture the whole of the rebel army, and set up their triumphant standard at Atlanta, then exit Southern Confederacy. But their dead were so piled in their path at Ringgold Gap that they could not pass them. The Spartans gained a name at Thermopylae, in which Leonidas and the whole Spartan army were slain while defending the pass. Cleburne's division gained a name at Ringgold Gap, in which they not only slew the victorious army, but captured 5,000 prisoners besides. That brilliant victory of Cleburne's made him not only the best general of the Army of Tennessee, and covered his men with glory and honor of heroes, but checked the advance of Grant's whole army. We did not budge an inch further for many a long day, but we went into winter quarters right here at Ringgold Gap, Tunnel Hill, and Dalton. Chapter 11. Dalton. General Joseph E. Johnston. General Joseph E. Johnston now took command of the army. General Bragg was relieved, and had become Jeff Davis's war advisor at Richmond, Virginia. We had followed General Bragg all through this long war. We had got sorter used to his ways, but he was never popular with his troops. I felt sorry for him. Bragg's troops would have loved him, if he had allowed them to do so, for many a word was spoken in his behalf, after he had been relieved of the command. As a general I have spoken of him in these memoirs, not personally. I try to state facts, so that you may see, reader, why our cause was lost. I have no doubt that Bragg ever did what he thought was best. He was but a man, under the authority of another. But now, allow me to introduce you to Old Joe. Fancy, if you please, a man about 50 years old, rather small of stature, but firmly and compactly built, an open and honest countenance, and a keen but restless black eye, that seemed to read your very inmost thoughts. In his dress he was a perfect dandy. He ever wore the very finest clothes that could be obtained, carrying out in every point the dress and paraphernalia of the soldier, as adopted by the War Department at Richmond, never omitting anything, even to the trappings of his horse, bridle, and saddle. His hat was decorated with a star and feather, his coat with every star and embellishment, and he wore a bright new sash, big gauntlets, and silver spurs. He was the very picture of a general. But he found the army depleted by battles, and worse, much worse, by desertion. The men were deserting by tens and hundreds, and I might say by thousands. The morale of the army was gone. The spirit of the soldiers was crushed, their hope gone. The future was dark and gloomy. They would not answer at roll call. Discipline had gone. A feeling of mistrust pervaded the whole army. A trainload of provisions came into Dalton. The soldiers stopped it before it rolled into the station, burst open every car, and carried off all the bacon, meal, and flour that was on board. Wild riot was the order of the day. Everything was confusion, worse confounded. When the news came, like pouring oil upon the troubled waters, that General Joe E. Johnston, of Virginia, had taken command of the Army of Tennessee, men returned to their companies, order was restored, and Richard was himself again. General Johnston issued a universal amnesty to all soldiers absent without leave. Instead of a scrimp pattern of 1 day's rations, he ordered 2 days' rations to be issued, being extra for 1 day. He ordered tobacco and whiskey to be issued twice a week. He ordered sugar and coffee and flour to be issued instead of meal. He ordered old bacon and ham to be issued instead of blue beef. He ordered new tents and marquees. He ordered his soldiers new suits of clothes, shoes, and hats. In fact, there had been a revolution, sure enough. He allowed us what General Bragg had never allowed mortal man, a furlough. He gave furloughs to 1/3 of his army at a time, until the whole had been furloughed. A new era had dawned, a new epoch had been dated. He passed through the ranks of the common soldiers, shaking hands with everyone he met. He restored the soldier's pride. He brought the manhood back to the private's bosom. He changed the order of roll call, standing guard, drill, and such nonsense as that. The revolution was complete. He was loved, respected, admired, yeah, almost worshipped by his troops. I do not believe there was a soldier in his army but would gladly have died for him. With him everything was his soldiers, and the newspapers, criticizing him at the time, said he would feed his soldiers if the country starved. We soon got proud. The blood of the old cavaliers tingled in our veins. We did not feel that we were serfs and vagabonds. We felt that we had a home and a country worth fighting for, and, if need be, worth dying for. One regiment could whip an army, and did do it, in every instance, before the command was taken from him at Atlanta. But of this another time. Chaplains were brought back to their regiments. Dr. C. T. Quintard and Reverend C. D. Eliot, and other chaplains, held divine services every Sabbath. Prayer was offered every evening at retreat, and the morale of the army was better in every respect. The private soldier once more regarded himself a gentleman and a man of honor. We were willing to do and die and dare anything for our loved South, and the stars and bars of the Confederacy. In addition to this, General Johnston ordered his soldiers to be paid up every cent that was due them, and a bounty of $50 besides. He issued an order to his troops offering promotion and a furlough for acts of gallantry and bravery on the field of battle. The cloven foot of tyranny and oppression was not discernible in the acts of officers, from general down to corporal, as formerly. Notwithstanding all this grand transformation in our affairs, old Joe was a strict disciplinarian. Everything moved like clockwork. Men had to keep their arms and clothing in good order. The artillery was rubbed up and put in good condition. The wagons were greased, and the harness and hamsterings oiled. Extra rations were issued to Negroes who were acting as servants, a thing unprecedented before in the history of the war. Well, old Joe was a yerker. He took all the tricks. He was a commander. He kept everything up and well in hand. His lines of battle were invulnerable. The larger his command, the easier he could handle it. When his army moved, it was a picture of battle, everything in its place, as laid down by scientific military rules. When a man was to be shot, he was shot for the crimes he had done, and not to intimidate and cow the living, and he had 10 times as many shot as Bragg had. He had 17 shot at Tunnel Hill, and a whole company at Rocky Face Ridge, and 2 spies hung at Ringgold Gap, but they were executed for their crimes. No one knew of it except those who had to take part as executioners of the law. Instead of the whipping post, he instituted the pillory and barrel shirt. Get Brutus to whistle the barrel shirt for you. The pillory was a newfangled concern. If you went to the guardhouse of almost any regiment, you would see some poor fellow with his head and hands sticking through a board. It had the appearance of a fellow taking a running start, at an angle of 45 degrees, with a view of bursting a board over his head, but when the board burst his head and both his hands were clamped in the bursted places. The barrel shirt brigade used to be marched on drill and parade. You could see a fellow's head and feet, and whenever one of the barrels would pass, you would hear the universal cry, "Come out of that barrel, I see your head and feet sticking out." There might have been a mortification and a disgrace in the pillory and barrel shirt business to those that had to use them, but they did not bruise and mutilate the physical man. When one of them had served out his time, he was as good as new. Old Joe had greater military insight than any general of the South, not excepting even Lee. He was the born soldier, seemed born to command. When his army moved, it moved solid. Cavalry, artillery, wagon train, and infantry stepped the same tread to the music of the march. His men were not allowed to be butchered for glory, and to have his name in a battle fought, with the number of killed and wounded, go back to Richmond for his own glory. When he fought for victory, not for glory. He could fall back right in the face of the foe as quietly and orderly as if on dress parade, and when his enemies crowded him a little too closely, he would about face and give them a terrible chastisement. He could not be taken by surprise by any flank movement of the enemy. His soldiers were to him as children. He loved them. They were never needlessly sacrificed. He was always ready to meet the attack of the enemy. When his line of battle was formed, it was like a wall of granite. His adversaries knew him, and dreaded the certain death that awaited them. His troops were brave, they laughed in the face of battle. He had no rear guard to shoot down anyone who ran. They couldn't run, the army was solid. The veriest coward that was ever born became a brave man and a hero under his manipulation. His troops had the utmost confidence in him, and feared no evil. They became an army of veterans, whose lines could not be broken by the armies of the world. Battle became a pastime and a pleasure, and the rattle of musketry and roar of cannon were but the music of victory and success. Commissaries. Before General Joseph E. Johnston took command of the Army of Tennessee, the soldiers were very poorly fed, it is true, but the blame was not entirely attributable to General Bragg. He issued enough and more than enough to have bountifully fed his army, but there was a lot of men in the army, generally denominated commissaries, and their gizzards, as well as fingers, had to be greased. There was commissary general, then corps commissary, then division commissary, then brigade commissary, then regimental commissary, then company commissary. Now, you know where you to start a nice hindquarter of beef, which had to pass through all these hands, and every commissary take a choice steak and roast off it. There would be but little ever reach the company, and the poor man among the Johnnies had to feast like bears in winter. They had to suck their paws. But the rich Johnnies who had money could go to almost any of the gentlemen-denominated commissaries, they ought to have been called cormorants, and buy of them much nice fat beef and meal, and flour and sugar and coffee and nice canvassed hams, etc. I have done it many times. They were keeping back the rations that had been issued to the army, and lining their own pockets. But when General Johnston took command, this manipulating business played out. Rations would spile on their hands. A fellow's occupation was gone. They received only $140 a month then, and the high private got plenty to eat, and Mr. Cormorant quit making as much money as he had heretofore done. Were you to go to them and make complaint, they would say, "I have issued regular army rations to your company, and what is left over is mine," and they were mighty exact about it. Dalton. We went into winter quarters at Dalton, and remained there during the cold, bad winter of 1863–64, about 4 months. The usual routine of army life was carried on day by day, with not many incidents to vary the monotony of camp life. But occasionally the soldiers would engage in a snowball battle, in which generals, colonels, captains and privates all took part. They would usually divide off into 2 grand divisions, one line naturally becoming the attacking party, and the other the defensive. The snowballs would begin to fly hither and thither, with an occasional knockdown, and sometimes an ugly wound, where some mean fellow had enclosed a rock in his snowball. It was fun while it lasted, but after it was over the soldiers were wet, cold and uncomfortable. I have seen charges and attacks and routs and stampedes, etc., but before the thing was over, one side did not know one from the other. It was a general knock-down and drag-out affair. Shooting a deserter. One morning I went over to Deschler's brigade of Cleburne's division to see my brother-in-law, Dr. J. E. Dixon. The snow was on the ground, and the boys were hard at it, snowballing. While I was standing looking on, a file of soldiers marched by me with a poor fellow on his way to be shot. He was blindfolded and set upon a stump, and the detail formed. The command, "Ready, aim, fire," was given, the volley discharged, and the prisoner fell off the stump. He had not been killed. It was the sergeant's duty to give the coup d'état, should not the prisoner be slain. The sergeant ran up and placed the muzzle of his gun at the head of the poor, pleading, and entreating wretch. His gun was discharged, and the wretched man only powder burned, the gun being one that had been loaded with powder only. The whole affair had to be gone over again. The soldiers had to reload and form and fire. The culprit was killed stone dead this time. He had no sooner been taken up and carried off to be buried, than the soldiers were throwing snowballs as hard as ever, as if nothing had happened. 10 men killed at the mourner's bench. At this place, Dalton, a revival of religion sprang up, and there was divine service every day and night. Soldiers became serious on the subject of their soul's salvation. In sweeping the streets and cleaning up, an old tree had been set on fire, and had been smoking and burning for several days, and nobody seemed to notice it. That night there was service as usual, and the singing and sermon were excellent. The sermon was preached by Reverend J. G. Bolton, chaplain of the 50th Tennessee Regiment, assisted by Reverend C. D. Elliott, the services being held in the 4th Tennessee Regiment. As it was the custom to call up mourners, a long bench had been placed in proper position for them to kneel down at. 10 of them were kneeling at this mourner's bench, pouring out their souls in prayer to God, asking Him for the forgiveness of their sins, and for the salvation of their souls, for Jesus Christ their Redeemer's sake, when the burning tree, without any warning, fell with a crash right across the 10 mourners, crushing and killing them instantly. God had heard their prayers. Their souls had been carried to heaven. Hereafter, henceforth, and forevermore, there was no more marching, battling, or camp duty for them. They had joined the army of the hosts of heaven. By order of the general, they were buried with great pomp and splendor, that is, for those times. Every one of them was buried in a coffin. Brass bands followed, playing the Dead March, and platoons fired over their graves. It was a soldier's funeral. The beautiful burial service of the Episcopal Church was read by Reverend Allen Tribble. A hymn was sung, and prayer offered, and then their graves were filled as we marched sadly back to camp. Dr. C. T. Quintard. Dr. C. T. Quintard was our chaplain for the 1st Tennessee Regiment during the whole war, and he stuck to us from the beginning even unto the end. During weekdays he ministered to us physically, and on Sundays spiritually. He was one of the purest and best men I ever knew. He would march and carry his knapsack every day the same as any soldier. He had one text he preached from which I remember now. It was the flying scroll. He said there was a flying scroll continually passing over our heads, which was like the reflections in a looking glass, and all of our deeds, both good and bad, were written upon it. He was a good doctor of medicine, as well as a good doctor of divinity, and above either of these, he was a good man per se. Every old soldier of the 1st Tennessee Regiment will remember Dr. C. T. Quintard with the kindest and most sincere emotions of love and respect. He would go off into the country and get up for our regiment clothing and provisions, and wrote a little prayer and song book, which he had published, and gave it to the soldiers. I learned that little prayer and song book off by heart, and have a copy of it in my possession yet, which I would not part with for any consideration. Dr. Quintard's nature was one of love. He loved the soldiers, and the soldiers loved him, and deep down in his heart of hearts was a deep and lasting love for Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of the world, implanted there by God the Father Himself. Why's you got my hog? One day, a party of us privates concluded we would go across the Chickamauga River on a raid. We crossed over in a canoe. After traveling for some time, we saw a neat-looking farmhouse, and sent one of the party forward to reconnoiter. He returned in a few minutes and announced that he had found a fine fat sow in a pen near the house. Now, The plan we formed was for two of us to go into the house and keep the inmates interested, and the other was to toll and drive off the hog. I was one of the party which went into the house. There was no one there but an old lady and her sick and widowed daughter. They invited us in very pleasantly and kindly, and soon prepared us a very nice and good dinner. The old lady told us of all her troubles and trials. Her husband had died before the war, and she had 3 sons in the army, 2 of whom had been killed, and the youngest, who had been conscripted, was taken with the camp fever and died in the hospital at Atlanta, and she had nothing to subsist upon, after eating up what they then had. I was much interested, and remained a little while after my comrade had left. I soon went out, having made up my mind to have nothing to do with the hog affair. I did not know how to act. I was in a bad fix. I had heard the gunfire and knew its portent. I knew the hog was dead, and went on up the road, and soon overtook my 2 comrades with the hog, which had been skinned and cut up, and was being carried on a pole between them. I did not know what to do. On looking back, I saw the old lady coming and screaming at the top of her voice, "You got my hog! You got my hog!" It was too late to back out now. We had the hog, and had to make the most of it, even if we did ruin a needy and destitute family. We went on until we came to the Chickamauga River, when lo and behold, the canoe was on the other side of the river. It was dark then, and getting darker, and what was to be done we did not know. The weather was as cold as blue blazes, and spitting snow from the northwest. That river had to be crossed that night. I undressed and determined to swim it, and went in, but the little thin ice at the bank caught my feet. I waded in a little further, but soon found I would cramp if I tried to swim it. I came out and put my clothes on, and thought of a gate about a mile back. We went back and took the gate off its hinges and carried it to the river and put it in the water, but soon found out that all 3 of us could not ride on it, so one of the party got on it and started across. He did very well until he came to the other bank, which was a high bluff, and if he got off the center of the gate it would capsize and he would get a ducking. He could not get off the gate. I told him to pull the gate up to the bank, so that one side would rest on the bank, and then make a quick run for the bank. He thought he had got the gate about the right place, and then made a run, and the gate went under, and so did he, in water 10 feet deep. My comrade, Founcey, who was with me on the bank, laughed, I thought, until he had hurt himself, but with me, I assure you, it was a mighty sickly grin, and with the other one, Barclay J., it was anything but a laughing matter. To me he seemed a hero. Barclay did about to liberate me from a very unpleasant position. He soon returned with the canoe, and we crossed the river with the hog. We worried and tugged with it, and got it to camp just before daylight. I had a guilty conscience, I assure you. The hog was cooked, but I did not eat a piece of it. I felt that I had rather starve, and I believe that it would have choked me to death if I had attempted it. A short time afterward an old citizen from Maury County visited me. My father sent me, by him, a silver watch, which I am wearing today, and $800 in old issue Confederate money. I took $200 of the money, and had it funded for new issue, 33 1/3 cents discount. The other $600 I sent to Vance Thompson, then on duty at Montgomery, with instructions to send it to my brother, Dave Watkins, Uncle Asa Freeman, and J.E. Dixon, all of whom were in Wheeler's cavalry, at some other point, I knew not where. After getting my money, I found that I had $133.33 1/3. I could not rest. I took $100, new issue, and going by my lone self back to the old lady's house, I said, "Madam, some soldiers were here a short time ago, and took your hog. I was one of that party, and I wish to pay you for it." "What was it worth?" "Well, sir," says she, "money is of no value to me. I cannot get any article that I wish. I would much rather have the hog." Says I, "Madam, that is an impossibility. Your hog is dead and eat up, and I have come to pay you for it." The old lady's eyes filled with tears. She said that she was perfectly willing to give the soldiers everything she had, and if she thought it had done us any good, she would not charge anything for it. "Well," says I, "Madam, here is $100, new issue, Confederate bill. Will this pay you for your hog?" "Well, sir," she says, drawing herself up to her full height, her cheeks flushed and her eyes flashing, "I do not want your money. I would feel that it was blood money." I saw that there was no further use to offer it to her. I sat down by the fire and the conversation turned upon other subjects. I helped the old lady catch a chicken, an old hen, about the last she had, for dinner, went with her in the garden and pulled a bunch of eschalots, brought 2 buckets of water, and cut and brought enough wood to last several days. After a while, she invited me to dinner, and after dinner I sat down by her side, took her old hand in mine, and told her the whole affair of the hog, from beginning to end, how sorry I was, and how I did not eat any of that hog, and asked her as a special act of kindness and favor to me, to take the $100, that I felt bad about it, and if she would take it, it would ease my conscience. I laid the money on the table and left. I have never in my life made a raid upon anybody else. Target shooting. By some hook, or crook, or blockade running, or smuggling, or Mason and Slidell, or Raphael Semmes, or something of the sort, the Confederate States government had come in possession of a small number of Whitworth guns, the finest long-range guns in the world, and a monopoly by the English government. They were to be given to the best shots in the army. One day Captain Joe P. Lee and Company Aytch went out to shoot at a target for the gun. We all wanted the gun, because if we got it we would be sharpshooters, and be relieved from camp duty, etc. All the generals and officers came out to see us shoot. The mark was put up about 500 yards on a hill, and each of us had 3 shots. Every shot that was fired hit the board, but there was one man who came a little closer to the spot than any other one, and the Whitworth was awarded him, and as we just turned round to go back to camp, a buck rabbit jumped up, and was streaking it as fast as he could make tracks, all the boys whooping and yelling as hard as they could, when Jimmy Webster raised his gun and pulled down on him, and cut the rabbit's head entirely off with a mini ball right back of his ears. He was about 250 yards off. It might have been an accidental shot, but General Leonidas Polk laughed very heartily at the incident, and I heard him ask one of his staff if the Whitworth gun had been awarded. The staff officer responded that it had, and that a certain man in Colonel Farquharson's regiment, the 4th Tennessee, was the successful contestant, and I heard General Polk remark, "I wish I had another gun to give. I would give it to the young man that shot the rabbit's head off." None of our regiment got a Whitworth, but it has been subsequently developed that our regiment had some of the finest shots in it the world ever produced. For instance, George and Matt Campbell, of Maury County, Billy Watkins, of Nashville, and Colonel H.R. Field, and many others, who I cannot now recall to mind in this rapid sketch. Uncle Zach and Aunt Daphne. While at this place, I went out one day to hunt someone to wash my clothes for me. I never was a good washerwoman. I could cook, bring water and cut wood, but never was much on the wash. In fact, it was an uphill business for me to wash up the things after grub time in our mess. I took my clothes and started out, and soon came to a little old Negro hut. I went in and says to an old negress, "Auntie, I would like for you to do a little washing for me." The old creature was glad to get it, as I agreed to pay her what it was worth. Her name was Aunt Daphne, and if she had been a politician, she would have been a success. I do not remember of a more fluent conversationalist in my life. Her tongue seemed to be on a balance, and both ends were trying to out-talk the other, but she was a good woman. Her husband was named Uncle Zach, and was the exact counterpart of Aunt Daphne. He always sat in the chimney corner, his feet in the ashes, and generally fast asleep. I am certain I never saw an uglier or more baboonish face in my life, but Uncle Zach was a good Christian, and I would sometimes wake him up to hear him talk Christian. He said that when he fest religion, did de Bill come dere one night, and say, "Zach, come go wid me," and den did de Bill tek me to hell, and jest stretch a wire across hell, and hang me up jest same like a side of bacon, through the tongue. Well, dar I hang like de bacon, and de grease kept droppin' down, and would blaze up all round me. I jest stay dar and burn, and after while did de Bill come round wid his gun, and say, "Zach, I gwine to shoot you," and jest as he raised the gun, I jest jerk loose from dat wire, and I jest fly to heaven. Fly. Did you have wings? Oh, yes, sir, I had wings. Well, after you got to heaven, what did you do then? Well, I jest went to eatin' grass like all the balance of the lambs. What? Were they eating grass? Oh, yes, sir. Well, what color were the lambs, Uncle Zach? Well, sir, some of them was white, and some black, and some spotted. Were there no old rams or ewes among them? No, sir, they was all lambs. Well, Uncle Zach, what sort of a looking lamb were you? Well, sir, I was sort of specklish and brown-like. Old Zach begins to get sleepy. Did you have horns, Uncle Zach? Well, some of dem had little horns dat look like dey was jest sorter sproutin' like. Zach begins to nod and doze a little. Well, how often did they shear the lambs, Uncle Zach. Well, and Uncle Zach was fast asleep and snoring, and dreaming no doubt of the beautiful pastures glimmering above the clouds of heaven. Red tape. While here I applied for a furlough. Now, reader, here commenced a series of red tapeism that always had characterized the officers under Braggism. It had to go through every officer's hands, from corporal up, before it was forwarded to the next officer of higher grade, and so it passed through every officer's hands. He felt it his sworn and bound duty to find some informality in it, and it was brought back for correction according to his notions, you see. Well, after getting the corporal's consent and approval, it goes up to the sergeant. It ain't right. Some informality, perhaps, in the wording and spelling. Then the lieutenants had to have a say in it, and when it got to the captain, it had to be read and reread, to see that every I was dotted and T crossed, but returned because there was one word that he couldn't make out. Then it was forwarded to the colonel. He would snatch it out of your hand, grit his teeth, and say, D.N. it, feel in his vest pocket and take out a lead pencil, and simply write App 4 approved. This would also be returned, with instructions that the colonel must write approved in a plain hand, and with pen and ink. Then it went to the brigadier general. He would be engaged in a game of poker, and would tell you to call again, as he didn't have time to bother with those small affairs at present. I'll see your 5 and raise you 10. I have a straight flush. Take the pot. After setting him out, and when it wasn't his deal, I get up and walk around, always keeping the furlough in sight. After reading carefully the furlough, he says, well, sir, you have failed to get the adjutant's name to it. You ought to have the colonel and adjutant, and you must go back and get their signatures. After this, you go to the major general. He is an old aristocratic fellow, who never smiles, and tries to look as sour as vinegar. He looks at the furlough, and looks down at the ground, holding the furlough in his hand in a kind of dreamy way, and then says, well, sir, this is all informal. You say, well, General, what is the matter with it? He looks at you as if he hadn't heard you, and repeats very slowly, well, sir, this is informal, and hands it back to you. You take it, feeling all the while that you wished you had not applied for a furlough, and by summoning all the fortitude that you possess, you say in a husky and choking voice, well, General, you say that General in a sort of gulp and dry swallow, what's the matter with the furlough? You look askance, and he very languidly retakes the furlough and glances over it, orders his Negro boy to go and feed his horse, asks his cook how long it will be before dinner, halloos at some fellow away down the hill that he would like for him to call at 4 o'clock this evening, and tells his adjutant to sign the furlough. The adjutant tries to be smart and polite, smiles a smile both childlike and bland, rolls up his shirt sleeves, and winks one eye at you, gets a straddle of a camp stool, whistles a little stanza of Schottish, and with a big flourish of his pen, writes the major general's name in small letters, and his own, the adjutant's, in very large letters, bringing the pen under it with tremendous flourishes, and writes approved and forwarded. You feel relieved. You feel that the anaconda's coil had been suddenly relaxed. Then you start out to the lieutenant general. You find him. He is in a very learned and dignified conversation about the war in Chile. Well, You get very anxious for the war in Chile to get to an end. The general pulls his side whiskers, looks wise, and tells his adjutant to look over it, and, if correct, sign it. The adjutant does not deign to condescend to notice you. He seems to be full of gumbo or calf-tail soup, and does not wish his equanimity disturbed. He takes hold of the document, and writes the lieutenant general's name, and finishes his own name while looking in another direction, approved and forwarded. Then you take it up to the general. The guard stops you in a very formal way, and asks, "What do you want?" You tell him. He calls for the orderly gives it to the adjutant, and you are informed that it will be sent to your colonel tonight, and given to you at roll call in the morning. Now, reader, the above is a pretty true picture of how I got my furlough. I get a furlough. After going through all the formality of red tapeism, and being snubbed with Tweedledum and Tweedledee, I got my furlough. When it started out, it was on the cleanest piece of paper that could be found in Buck Lanier's sutler's store. After it came back, it was pretty well used up, and looked as if it had gone through a very dark place, and been beat with a soot bag. But, anyhow, I know that I did not appreciate my furlough half as much as I thought I would. I felt like returning it to the gentlemen with my compliments, declining their kind favors. I felt that it was unwillingly given, and, as like begets like, it was very unwillingly received. Honestly, I felt as if I had made a bad bargain, and was keen to rue the trade. I did not know what to do with it, but, anyhow, I thought I would make the best of a bad bargain. I got on the cars at Dalton. Now, here's a thing that I had long since forgotten about. It was the first-class passenger car that I had been in since I had been a soldier. The conductor passed around, and handed me a ticket with these words on it. "If you wish to travel with ease, keep this ticket in sight, if you please. And if you wish to take a nap, just stick this in your hat or cap." This was the poetry, reader, that was upon the ticket. The conductor called around every now and then, especially if you were asleep, to look at your ticket, and every now and then a captain and a detail of 3 soldiers would want to look at your furlough. I thought before I got to Selma, Alabama, that I wished the ticket and furlough both were in the bottom of the ocean, and myself back in camp. Everywhere I went someone wanted to see my furlough. Before I got my furlough, I thought it sounded big. Furlough was a war word, and I did not comprehend its meaning until I got one. The very word furlough made me sick then. I feel fainty now whenever I think of furlough. It has a sickening sound in the ring of it, furlough. Furlock, it ought to have been called. Every man I met had a furlough. In fact, it seemed to have the very double extract of romance about it, fur too, eh? Men who I knew had never been in the army in their lives, all had furloughs. Where so many men ever got furloughs from I never knew, but I know now. They were like the old bachelor who married the widow with 10 children. He married a ready-made family. They had ready-made furloughs. But I have said enough on the furlough question. It enthralled me, let it pass, don't want any more furloughs. But while on my furlough, I got with Captain G.M.V. Kinzer, a fine-dressed and handsome cavalry captain, whom all the ladies, as they do at the present day, fell in love with. The captain and myself were great friends. The captain gave me his old coat to act captain in, but the old thing wouldn't act. I would keep the collar turned down. One night we went to call on a couple of beautiful and interesting ladies near Selma. We chatted the girls until the wee SMA hours of morning, and when the young ladies retired, remarked that they would send a servant to show us to our room. We waited, no servant came. The captain and myself snoozed it out as best we could. About daylight the next morning the captain and myself thought that we would appear as if we had risen very early, and began to move about, and opening the door, there lay a big black Negro on his knees and face. Now, reader, what do you suppose that Negro was doing? You could not guess in a week. The black rascal. Hideous. Terrible to contemplate. Vile. Outrageous. Well, words cannot express it. What do you suppose he was doing? He was fast asleep. He had come thus far, and could go no further, and fell asleep. There is where the captain and myself found him at daylight the next morning. We left for Selma immediately after breakfast, leaving the family in ignorance of the occurrence. The captain and myself had several other adventures, but the captain always had the advantage of me. He had the good clothes, and the good looks, and got all the good presents from the pretty young ladies. Well, you might say, cut me out on all occasions. That's what makes me spise a furlough. But then furlough sounds big, you know. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for part 4, where the journey continues deeper into the heart of the Confederacy, and the soul of one weary soldier. Don't forget to like, subscribe and be ready for the next part.